What would you do if you saw a young mother crying in the darkness, choosing between her child's medicine and next month's rent? Most people would walk away. One millionaire CEO didn't, but what he did next wasn't what anyone expected, not even her. This is the true story of Shayla Matthews, a 19-year-old single mother who thought her prayers went unanswered, until she discovered that help had been there all along, wearing an unexpected face. What happened when her world fell apart will restore your faith in humanity. This is a story about dignity, secrets, and the unbelievable power of silent kindness. The fluorescent lights of Memorial Hospital's parking lot flickered weakly against the November darkness. It was 11:47 p.m., and Shayla Matthews sat motionless in her 12-year-old Honda Civic, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. At 19 years old, she should have been studying for finals, going to parties, living the carefree life her college classmates enjoyed. Instead, she was calculating whether she could afford her daughter's antibiotic prescription or this month's electric bill. Not both. Never both. The tears came suddenly, violently, shaking her shoulders as she pressed her forehead against the cold steering wheel. She'd held it together through her double shift as a hospital dietary aide, through the nursing class she'd attended via laptop during her lunch break, through picking up Maya from after-school care with a smile plastered on her exhausted face. But here, alone in the darkness, the dam finally broke. "God, I'm trying," she whispered into the empty car. "I'm trying so hard." Her phone buzzed. Another text from the pharmacy. "Prescription ready for pickup. $127.30. Will hold until tomorrow." Maya's ear infection needed treatment tonight, not tomorrow. The little girl was home with Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched her for free in exchange for Shayla's help with groceries. 77 years old and kinder than any family Shayla had left. Shayla wiped her face roughly and checked her bank account on her phone. $43.12. Payday wasn't until Friday, 3 days away. Her credit cards were maxed from last month's car repair. The hospital credit union had denied her loan request this afternoon. Insufficient credit history, they'd said, as if being young and poor was a moral failing. The real breaking point had come 2 hours earlier. Mrs. Vanderworth, a wealthy patient's wife, had called Shayla to her husband's private room. "Girlless water pitcher is filthy," she'd announced loudly, though the pitcher was perfectly clean. "Is this how you people maintain standards? No wonder you're stuck serving food instead of doing real medical work." Shayla had apologized, replaced the pitcher, and said nothing. She'd learned long ago that defending yourself while young, black, and wearing a service uniform only made things worse. But Mrs. Vanderworth hadn't finished. "How old are you anyway? You look like a child. Do you even have a high school diploma?" "I'm enrolled in the nursing program, ma'am," Shayla had replied quietly. "Nursing school?" Mrs. Vanderworth had laughed sharply. "Honey, stick to pushing food carts. Some people aren't meant for professional careers." Her husband had at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he hadn't said a word. No one ever did. Shayla had finished her shift with her head high and her heart shattered. Now, in the darkness of the parking lot, she allowed herself 5 minutes to fall apart. Just 5 minutes. Then she would drive to the pharmacy, beg them to front her the medication until Friday, and pray they said yes. She would go home, give Maya her medicine, help her with bedtime prayers, and study for her anatomy exam until 2 a.m. before her early morning cleaning shift at the office building downtown. She would survive this. She always did. What Shayla didn't know was that 3 parking spaces away, Marcus Chen sat in his Mercedes, having witnessed the entire exchange with Mrs. Vanderworth through the hospital room window while visiting a board member. He'd been heading to his car when he heard the sound of quiet sobbing. Now, watching this young woman struggle to hold herself together in the darkness, something in his chest cracked open. Marcus was 28 years old, the youngest CEO in his company's history, worth $43 million on paper. He'd built his success story from nothing, or so everyone thought. The truth was different. The truth was a single mother who'd worked herself to death to give him opportunities, literally. His mother had collapsed from exhaustion when he was 16, her heart giving out after decades of triple shifts and no rest. He'd sworn he'd never let another mother sacrifice herself that way if he could help it. Marcus didn't approach Shayla's car. He wasn't a fool, a strange man approaching a young woman alone at night. in a dark parking lot would only frighten her. Instead, he took a photo of her license plate, made a call to his assistant, and said 6 words: "Find out everything. Do it quietly." Then he sat in his car and waited until Shayla pulled herself together, wiped her eyes, and drove away into the night. He didn't know her story yet, but he would, and once he did, everything would change. The 24-hour pharmacy was nearly empty when Shayla pushed through the door at 12:15 a.m., Maya sleeping heavily against her shoulder. The little girl had developed a fever during the evening, and Mrs. E. Chen had called with worry in her elderly voice. Shayla had driven straight home from the hospital, scooped up her daughter still in her frozen pajamas, and headed straight for the pharmacy. "Please," Shayla said quietly to the pharmacist, a middle-aged woman named Diane who'd helped her before. "I know I'm short. I get paid Friday. Can you please front me the medication? My daughter needs it tonight." Diane's eyes were sympathetic, but her hands were tied. "Honey, I would if I could, but corporate policy changed last month. We can't extend credit anymore. Insurance won't cover it." "We're between plans," Shayla explained, shifting Maya's weight. Her arms ached from carrying her daughter, from carrying everything. "My full-time benefits don't kick in for another 2 weeks." Shayla worked 32 hours at the hospital, just under the full-time threshold that would trigger benefits. It was deliberate on the hospital's part, a cost-saving measure. She knew it. They knew she knew it. Nothing changed. Diane glanced around, then leaned forward. "Look, my shift ends in 40 minutes. I can lend you $60. It's not the full amount, but no." Shayla's voice was firm despite her desperation. "No, I can't take your money. You've been too kind already." "Shayla, I'll figure it out." "Thank you, Diane." "Really?" Shayla carried Maya back to the car, her mind racing. She could pawn her laptop, but she needed it for school. She could skip her car insurance payment, but driving without insurance risked everything. She could call her ex-boyfriend, Maya's father, but he'd disappeared to Atlanta 2 years ago and changed his number. She could call her mother, but her mother had made it clear when Shayla got pregnant at 17 that she was on her own. "You made an adult choice. You live with adult consequences," her mother had said. They hadn't spoken since Maya's first birthday. Shayla was completely, utterly alone. She drove to the all-night supermarket, bought children's Tylenol for 8.47 to Maya's fever, and headed home to their small apartment. Mrs. 100 Oven's small apartment. Chen was waiting up, heating soup she'd made earlier. "She needs antibiotics," Shayla said, fighting tears again. "I can't get them until Friday." "Mrs. Beer." Chen wrapped her in a hug that smelled like jasmine and tiger balm. "My grandson is a doctor. I call him." "Mrs. Chen, I can't afford." "No charge. He owes me." "I raised him. He owes me forever." The old woman's eyes twinkled despite the late hour. "You put her to bed. I make the call." 2 hours later, Mrs. Rengen, Chen's grandson, arrived with sample antibiotics from his clinic and refused payment despite Shayla's insistence. "My grandmother says you're family," he said simply. "Family helps family." Shayla gave Maya the first dose and watched her daughter's breathing ease into deeper sleep. She studied until 4 a.m., took a 30-minute shower, and headed to her cleaning job at 5 a.m. She never saw the black Mercedes that had followed her from the pharmacy to the supermarket to her apartment building, never noticed the man inside making phone calls, taking notes, watching her handle crisis after crisis with quiet dignity. Marcus Chen had seen enough for one night. Tomorrow, his assistant would deliver the full report. Tonight, he'd witness something more valuable than any data: character under pressure. His mother would have liked Shayla, he thought. They were cut from the same cloth, that rare fabric, woven from determination, sacrifice, and unbreakable love. He started his car and drove home to his penthouse apartment. But he didn't sleep. Instead, he began making plans. Careful plans. Secret plans. Shayla Matthews didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change. Not through rescue or charity. Marcus knew better than that. His mother had taught him that handouts destroy dignity, while opportunities build it. No, what Shayla needed wasn't money. What she needed was a chance, and Marcus Chen specialized in creating chances. 3 days later, Shayla stood in the hospital's human resources office, confused and cautious. The HR director, Ms. Patricia Monroe, smiled warmly and gestured to a chair. Shayla, I'll get right to it. We've received a notification about an emergency healthcare scholarship from the Regional Medical Foundation. You've been selected as a recipient. Shayla blinked. I'm sorry, what? It's a new program targeting employees pursuing nursing degrees while working in healthcare facilities. Full tuition coverage for your remaining program, plus a $1,500 monthly stipend for living expenses. Patricia slid a folder across the desk. The foundation representative will meet with you next week to discuss details, but I wanted to give you the good news personally. Congratulations. Shayla's hand shook as she opened the folder. The letterhead was embossed. Official, real. I don't understand. I didn't apply for this. The selection was based on employee records, GPA, work performance, demonstrated need. You qualified automatically. Patricia's smile widened. Shayla, you work harder than people twice your age. You deserve this. Walking out of the office, Shayla felt dizzy. $1,500 a month. No more choosing between Maya's needs and school supplies. No more working 3 jobs. She could actually sleep. That evening, she received an email from Maya's school. The after-school program was offering 10 full scholarships for single-parent families, and Maya had been randomly selected. Free care until 6 p.m., including homework help and dinner. Shayla read the email 3 times, then called the school to confirm it wasn't a mistake. No mistake, the administrator assured her. A local donor specifically funded extended care for working parents. Maya's name was drawn from the eligible pool. Consider it a blessing. A blessing. That's what Mrs. Will to Mission, Chen called it when Shayla told her the news. God sees your hard work, the old woman said, squeezing Shayla's hands. Finally, he sends help. Shayla wanted to believe it, but something felt odd about the timing, the scholarship, the school program, both arriving in the same week. She'd applied for dozens of scholarships over 2 years and received nothing. Now suddenly, 2 miracles at once? She pushed the suspicion away. Maybe it really was just answered prayer. Maybe her mother had been wrong and good things did happen to people who worked hard. What Shayla didn't know was that Marcus Chen had spent the last 72 hours restructuring his charitable foundation's mission statement, creating a new healthcare scholarship program, and personally donating $100,000 to Maya's school district specifically for after-school care. His assistant had questioned the specifics. Sir, wouldn't it be more efficient to help her directly? No, Marcus had replied firmly. Direct charity destroys initiative. She needs to believe she earned this, because she did just by being who she is. He'd also quietly paid the hospital's medical billing department to discover an error in several bills associated with Shayla's employee healthcare access, resulting in credits to her account. He'd arranged for the hospital cafeteria to begin offering free meals to dietary staff during shifts, a policy update that benefited Shayla and 20 other workers. Everything had to look systematic, institutional, impersonal. Nothing could trace back to him specifically. Marcus watched from a distance as Shayla's life began to stabilize. He saw her smile more at work, heard through his board member contact that she'd started contributing more in her online classes, no longer half asleep from exhaustion, learned from Mrs. Praff, Chin, whom he'd befriended during a random encounter at the community center, that Shayla had cried with relief for an hour when she realized she could cut back to 1 job. She's such a good girl, Mrs. Chen had told him, not knowing who he really was. She deserves every good thing. You know, she reminds me of someone I worked with many years ago. Same strength, same heart. Really? Marcus had asked carefully. Who? Woman named Dorothy Chen. No relation to you, I suppose. Chen is common name, but Dorothy and I worked the night shift at General Hospital in the 80s. She had a young son, worked herself to the bone for that boy. Mrs. Chen's eyes had grown distant. I heard she passed away. Very sad. But I think she'd be proud of how her son turned out, wherever he is. Marcus had nearly revealed himself then. But he'd held back. Not yet. The timing wasn't right, because Mrs. Chen was right. His mother, Dorothy, would have been proud, and she would have known Shayla was special. Dorothy had always recognized strength in others because she'd embodied it herself. Now, watching Shayla begin to breathe again, Marcus felt his mother's presence like a whisper. Help her rise, don't just lift her up. Give her wings, not a crutch. He was doing exactly that, but what Marcus didn't anticipate was how quickly everything could fall apart, and how one false accusation could destroy everything he'd carefully built. The accusation came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the scholarship had changed Shayla's life. She was called to the security office during her shift, confused but not yet afraid. Hospital security dealt with everything from parking disputes to lost badges. She assumed it was routine. It wasn't. Miss Matthews, we need to discuss a serious matter. The security director, Mr. Prayer Holloway, gestured to a chair. His expression was grave. There's been a report of missing medication from the 5th floor supply room, hydrocodone specifically. According to access logs, you were in that room yesterday afternoon. Shayla's stomach dropped. I was delivering meal trays to that floor. I didn't go into the supply room. I don't even have access. I'm dietary, not nursing staff. The door was found propped open. Anyone could have entered. Holloway pulled up security footage on his computer. This shows you in the hallway at 2:47 p.m. The medication was logged as missing during the 3 p.m. inventory check. I was in the hallway delivering trays. I didn't enter that room. Shayla's voice remained steady, but her heart was racing. You can check the footage. It will show I didn't go in there. Unfortunately, the camera angle doesn't cover the supply room entrance directly. There's a blind spot. Holloway's tone softened slightly. Look, Shayla, if you're struggling financially, if you made a mistake, I didn't take anything. Shayla stood up, her legs shaking. I would never steal. I would never jeopardize my job, my scholarship, my daughter's future for what? Pills I don't even use. The hospital administrator, Mr. Pearson, spoke for the first time. Miss Matthews, we want to handle this internally if possible. If you cooperate, return what was taken. We can avoid involving the police. You could resign quietly. Keep your record clean. Shayla felt the room tilt. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when everything was finally getting better. I didn't take anything, she repeated, her voice breaking. Please check the footage again. Check everything. I'm innocent. But she could see they'd already decided. A young black woman working a low-level job, suddenly receiving scholarships and benefits in the wrong place at the wrong time. The story wrote itself in their minds. We're suspending you pending investigation, Pearson said. You'll need to surrender your ID badge and leave the premises. I need this job, Shayla whispered. I have a daughter. I'm in school. This will destroy everything. You should have thought of that before, Holloway said. Shayla was escorted out of the hospital like a criminal. Coworkers stared. Mrs. Bree Vanderworth, walking through the lobby with her husband, saw the scene and smirked. I knew that girl was trouble, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Shayla held her head high until she reached her car. Then she collapsed. This was it. The end of everything. They'd revoke her scholarship for violating hospital policy. She'd lose her position in the nursing program. She'd be blacklisted from healthcare work. No one would hire her with a theft investigation on her record, even if charges weren't filed. She'd survive before the scholarships. She could survive again. But Maya, sweet Maya, who was finally thriving in after-school care, who'd stopped asking why they never had new clothes or toys, who'd started believing her mother could do anything, Maya would watch their life collapse again. Shayla cried until she had no tears left. Then she drove to pick up Maya from school early, held her daughter tight, and tried to figure out how to explain that Mommy had lost her job. What Shayla didn't know was that Marcus Chen had received an emergency call from his hospital board contact 10 minutes after her suspension. There's a situation with that dietary worker you've been helping, the contact had said carefully. Theft accusation. I thought you should know. Marcus had gone completely still. Details. Now. After hearing the full story, Marcus had made 3 phone calls. The first was to his head of security, a former FBI investigator. The second was to his legal team. The third was to a private investigator who specialized in corporate security systems. I need to know exactly what happened in that hospital, Marcus had said, his voice cold with controlled fury. I need to know who took that medication, how Shayla Matthews ended up blamed for it, and I need to know by tomorrow morning. Money is not an object. Because Marcus knew something the hospital security didn't know. Shayla Matthews was incapable of theft. He'd watched her for weeks. He'd seen her return a $20 bill the supermarket cashier had overpaid her in change. He'd heard from Mrs. Chen how Shayla had found a wallet in the park and spent 2 hours tracking down the owner. This was a setup. It had to be. And Marcus was going to prove it. Marcus didn't sleep that night. His team worked through the darkness, pulling strings, accessing records, interviewing witnesses under the guise of routine security audits. By 6 a.m., they had the truth. The private investigator had discovered that the hospital's security footage had been deliberately obscured, not completely deleted, but the timing had been manipulated. The original footage showed Shayla walking past the supply room without stopping, but a second figure, visible only in a brief flash before the angle shifted, had entered the room. Enhanced imaging revealed the figure, a pharmacy technician named Derek Simmons, who'd been skimming medications for months. He'd gotten sloppy, taken too much at once, and needed a scapegoat. Shayla had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was more. The investigator had also discovered that Derek's girlfriend worked in HR, the same department that had access to employee schedules and could have orchestrated Shayla's presence in that hallway at that specific time. It was a setup, a deliberate, calculated frame job. Marcus's legal team prepared an airtight case by 8 a.m. His security chief had already contacted federal authorities, since medication theft from a hospital was a federal crime. By 9 a.m., Marcus was standing in the hospital administrator's office with his lawyer, a folder of evidence, and a very controlled rage. Mr. Chen, Administrator Pearson stood quickly surprised. I didn't know you were. This is unexpected. How can I help you? You can explain to me why you suspended Shayla Matthews without reviewing all available evidence, Marcus said quietly. His tone was ice. And then you can explain why your security director accepted the word of a pharmacy tech with 3 complaints of unprofessional behavior instead of conducting a thorough investigation. Pearson's face paled. I'm not sure I understand your interest in. Marcus dropped the folder on the desk. That contains enhanced security footage clearly showing Derek Simmons entering the supply room and exiting with concealed items. It contains pharmacy records showing a pattern of inventory discrepancies matching Simmons' shift schedule. It contains communications between Simmons and HR employee Jennifer Walsh discussing handling a problem the day before the theft. Pearson opened the folder with shaking hands. You suspended an innocent woman, Marcus continued, his voice deadly calm. A woman who works harder than anyone in this building. A woman who's never had so much as a customer complaint. You believed she was guilty because it was easy, convenient, because she fit your unconscious bias about who commits crimes in your hospital. Mr. Chen, I assure you, you will reinstate Shayla Matthews immediately with full back pay and a formal written apology. You will clear her record completely. You will implement mandatory bias training for all supervisory staff, and you will create an employee advocate position to ensure this never happens again. Marcus leaned forward, or I will have my foundation pull its $15 million endowment from this hospital, and I will personally ensure that every news outlet in the region knows exactly how you treat your most vulnerable employees. Pearson swallowed hard. Of course. Immediately. I'll call her right now. No. Marcus straightened. I'll tell her myself. Because it was time. Time to stop hiding. Time for Shayla to know the truth. Marcus drove to Shayla's apartment complex, his heart pounding harder than during any business negotiation. He'd bought and sold companies. He'd managed hundreds of employees. But facing this 19-year-old single mother terrified him, because he wasn't just revealing his identity, he was risking her trust. And somehow, over these weeks of watching her fight and survive and love her daughter with everything she had, Shayla's opinion had become the one that mattered most. He knocked on her door at 10 a.m. Shayla answered wearing sweatpants and Maya's elementary school t-shirt, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw Marcus in his expensive suit, her expression closed. If you're from the hospital's legal team, I already told them I didn't. I'm not here to accuse you, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm here to clear your name. May I come in? Confusion flickered across Shayla's face, but she stepped aside. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Marcus sat at Shayla's tiny kitchen table, The same table where she studied until 2 a.m., where Maya practiced her spelling words, where dreams had been built and broken 100 times. "My name is Marcus Chen," he began. "I'm the CEO of Chen Medical Holdings. I'm also the person who's been helping you for the last month." Shayla stared at him. "I don't understand." "The scholarship, the after-school program, the hospital policy changes, they were all me." Marcus kept his voice gentle. "I've been watching you, Shayla, not in a creepy way, please understand, but I saw you that night in the parking lot. I heard you crying, and I couldn't walk away." Shayla's hands clenched into fists. "You've been spying on me. I've been helping you, without my permission, without my knowledge." Shayla stood up, anger and humiliation flooding through her. "Did you think I was some charity case? Some project for you to feel good about?" "No," Marcus said firmly, standing as well. "I thought you were someone drowning who deserved a life raft. Someone who'd been working 3 jobs while raising a child alone and going to school. Someone who deserved a chance. I didn't ask for your help." "Would you have accepted it if you'd known?" Marcus challenged. "If I'd walked up to you and offered to pay your bills, would you have said yes?" Shayla fell silent because she knew the answer. No. She would have refused. Pride, dignity, fear of owing someone all of it would have made her say no. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why me? There are thousands of struggling single mothers. Why did you choose to help me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because my mother was you." "Exactly you. Single mother. Multiple jobs. Trying to give her son everything while sacrificing herself. She died when I was 16. Heart attack from exhaustion. I built everything I have on the foundation of her sacrifice." His voice cracked slightly. "And when I saw you in that parking lot, breaking down where no one could see because you wouldn't let your daughter know how scared you were, I saw her, and I couldn't let it happen again." Shayla felt her anger deflate. "That still doesn't give you the right to manipulate my life." "You're right, it doesn't." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat back down. "I'm not here to defend what I did. I'm here to tell you the truth, all of it." He explained about the investigation, about Derek Simmons, about the evidence that proved her innocence. He explained how he'd confronted the hospital administration and secured her reinstatement. "You can go back to work tomorrow with a clean record and an apology," Marcus finished. "That part wasn't manipulation, that was justice." Shayla sank into her chair, overwhelmed. "They were going to destroy me. They didn't even investigate. They just assumed, I know." Marcus's voice was hard. "And that's going to change. But Shayla, I need you to understand something. You were never my charity case. You were never my project. You were my reminder." "Reminder of what?" "That people like my mother, like you, exist. People who work until their bodies break. People who sacrifice everything for their children. People the system fails over and over." He met her eyes directly. "I have money now. Resources. Power. If I can't use those things to help people who remind me why success matters, what's the point of any of it?" Shayla wiped her eyes. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me." Marcus smiled slightly. "You're perceptive." He pulled out his phone and showed her an old photograph. "This is my mother, Dorothy Chen, in 1987. She worked the night shift at General Hospital. Do you recognize the woman standing next to her?" Shayla looked at the photo and gasped. "That's Mrs. Chen. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen." Chen. They worked together for 15 years, best friends. "When my mother died, Mrs. Chen tried to find me, but I was in foster care by then, and the system had moved me. She never knew what happened to me." Marcus's voice softened. "When I saw you were living next to her, when I saw how she'd taken you under her wing the same way she'd supported my mother, I knew it wasn't coincidence. I knew I had to help." "Does she know who you are?" "Not yet. I've been waiting for the right time." Shayla stood up and walked to the window, processing everything. The scholarships, the programs, the invisible hand that had lifted her up just when she thought she'd drown. All of it connected to a promise made decades ago between 2 women working the night shift. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked. "Nothing," Marcus said. "The scholarships are yours regardless. Your job is secure. Nothing changes if you tell me to leave right now and never contact you again." But But I'd like to offer you something more. Not charity, an opportunity. Marcus pulled out a business card. My foundation is expanding its healthcare advocacy programs. We need someone who understands what patients and workers face, someone who's lived it. I'd like to offer you a position as a community liaison, part-time while you finish school, full benefits, salary that would let you quit your other jobs. Shayla took the card, her hands shaking. Why would you trust me with something like that? Because you were willing to lose everything rather than admit to something you didn't do. Because you work 3 jobs but you've never missed one of Maya's school events. Because Mrs. Chen says you're the kindest person she's ever met, and my mother trusted her judgment above anyone else's. Marcus stood. You don't have to decide now. Take time. Think about it. But Shayla, please understand, you earned this, everything. Your scholarship, your success, all of it. I just removed some obstacles. The climbing was all you. After Marcus left, Shayla sat in stunned silence for an hour. Then she walked next door to Mrs. Chen's apartment and knocked. I need to tell you something about your friend's son, she said when the old woman answered. Mrs. Chen listened to the entire story. Then she smiled, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. Dorothy's boy found his way home, she whispered. Finally, he found his way home. Shayla returned to work 3 days later. The apology from Administrator Pearson was formal and public. Derek Simmons had been arrested. The hospital implemented the reforms Marcus had demanded, but more important than any of that was the change in how people looked at her. The dietary staff threw her a welcome back party. Nurses who'd never spoken to her before stopped to say they'd known she was innocent. Even Mrs. Vanderwert's husband had approached her in the hallway to apologize for his wife's behavior. She judges too quickly, he'd said quietly. I should have said something before. I'm sorry. Shayla had accepted the apology with grace, though she'd wanted to tell him that silence in the face of cruelty was its own form of cruelty. Some lessons people had to learn on their own. The scholarship remained in place. The after-school program continued. Everything Marcus had set in motion kept moving forward. But Shayla hadn't called him about the job offer. For 2 weeks, she carried his business card in her pocket, pulling it out during quiet moments, thinking. She talked to Mrs. Reed's Wade Chen, who told her stories about Dorothy Chen's fierce determination and her dreams for her son. She wanted him to be successful, yes, Mrs. Chen said, but more than that, she wanted him to be good, to use whatever he achieved to help others. I think he's trying to honor her. Shayla talked to Maya in age-appropriate terms about the opportunity. Would we have more time together? Maya had asked. Yes, baby, a lot more time. Then you should do it, Mama. But Shayla had one more conversation to have before she decided. She called Marcus and asked him to meet her at the park where she took Maya on Saturdays. Marcus arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking younger and more nervous than during their first real conversation. Thank you for meeting me, Shayla said. They sat on a bench while Maya played on the swings nearby. Of course, I need to know something before I make a decision, Shayla said carefully. Is this job real, or is it another way to help me without me knowing it's help? Marcus considered the question seriously. The position is real. We genuinely need someone for it. But would I have created it if I hadn't met you? Probably not this soon. So it's both. A real job that exists partly because you inspired it. Honest answer. I appreciate that. Shayla watched Maya play, her daughter's laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. I've been thinking a lot about pride versus wisdom, about knowing when to accept help and when to stand alone. What did you decide? I decided that you were right about one thing. I wouldn't have accepted help if I'd known it was help. I would have kept drowning because I was too proud to grab the life raft. Shayla turned to look at Marcus directly. But I also decided that you were wrong about something. What's that? You said you removed obstacles and I did the climbing. But Marcus, you were part of my climb. The scholarships, the stability. Those didn't just remove obstacles. They gave me the energy to keep climbing. They let me sleep enough to think clearly. They let me be the mother Maya deserves instead of an exhausted ghost. Shayla's voice strengthened. So I'm not going to pretend I did this alone. I'm going to accept that sometimes help is a blessing. And I'm going to accept your job offer. But on one condition. Name it. I want to help design the programs your foundation creates, not just implement them. Because I know what struggling families need. I've lived it. And I want to make sure that whatever help we give people, it empowers them. It doesn't make them feel small or shameful or like charity cases. Marcus smiled, genuine and warm. Done. Absolutely done. They shook hands. Then impulsively, Shayla hugged him. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for caring when you didn't have to, for keeping a promise to your mother by helping someone else's daughter. Marcus hugged her back carefully, respectfully. Thank you for letting me, and for reminding me why any of this matters. Maya ran over then, curious about the man talking to her mother. Shayla introduced them properly for the first time. Mr. Men, Chen helped Mommy get a really good new job, Shayla explained. What do you say? Maya executed a perfect curtsy she'd learned in school. Thank you for helping my mama. She works really hard. I know she does, Marcus said seriously, crouching to Maya's level. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. You're lucky to have her. I know, Maya said matter-of-factly. She's the best mama in the whole world. Watching them together, Shayla felt something shift in her chest. For years she'd built walls around herself and Maya, convinced they had to survive alone. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe community, connection, accepting help with grace. Maybe those weren't weaknesses. Maybe they were how human beings were meant to live. 6 months later, the community center was decorated for a celebration. The occasion was officially the launch of the Chen Medical Foundation's new community health advocacy program. Unofficially, it was a reunion 30 years in the making. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row wearing her best dress, tears already streaming down her face. She'd known for months now that Marcus was Dorothy's son. Shayla had told her the truth immediately after their part conversation. But today was different. Today was public acknowledgement. Today was family claiming family. Marcus stood at the podium looking out at the crowd of healthcare workers, community members, and foundation staff. His eyes found Shayla, who sat in the second row holding Maya's hand. She gave him an encouraging nod. My mother, Dorothy Chen, died when I was 16, Marcus began, his voice steady but emotional. She worked herself to death, literally trying to give me opportunities she never had. For years I thought her sacrifice meant I had to succeed alone, that accepting help or showing weakness would dishonor her memory. He paused, gathering himself. I was wrong. My mother's strength wasn't in suffering alone. It was in building community. She had friends like Mrs. Chen who shared night shifts and struggled together and lifted each other up. She understood that human beings need each other, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes, smiling through her tears. 6 months ago, I met someone who reminded me of my mother, Marcus continued. Shayla Matthews is 19 years old. She's a single mother. She was working 3 jobs while going to nursing school and raising her daughter with more love and dedication than most people show in their entire lives, and she was drowning. Marcus looked directly at Shayla. I tried to help her secretly because I was afraid she'd refuse if she knew, and I was right, she would have, because people like Shayla, like my mother, are taught that accepting help is shameful, that struggling alone is noble. But here's what Shayla taught me. Help isn't shameful when it's given with respect, when it empowers instead of rescues, when it acknowledges someone's strength instead of highlighting their weakness. Marcus smiled. Shayla took the opportunities I helped create and built something incredible. She's graduating from her nursing program in 3 weeks, top of her class. She's been hired as our foundation's first community health advocate. And most importantly, she's shown her daughter that asking for help when you need it is brave, not weak. The crowd applauded. Shayla blushed, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the acknowledgement. Marcus gestured to Mrs. Chen. And this woman, Mrs. Lily Chen, was my mother's best friend. She tried to find me after my mother died, but the foster system had moved me and we lost contact. When I discovered that she'd taken Shayla under her wing the same way she'd supported my mother, I knew the universe was giving me a chance to complete a circle. Mrs. Chen stood up, and Marcus came down from the podium to embrace her. The room erupted in applause. Your mother would be so proud, Mrs. Chen whispered in his ear. So very proud. I hope so, Marcus whispered back. I'm trying to honor her. After the speeches, after the celebration, after the photographs and the congratulations, Shayla found herself on the community center's back patio with Marcus and Mrs. Marcus, Shen, while Maya played with other children inside. "I've been thinking," Shayla said carefully, "about the story we're telling, about this whole journey." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "People are going to hear about this, the struggling single mother, the generous CEO, the miraculous help. They're going to make it into a fairy tale." Shayla looked at both of them seriously. "But it's not a fairy tale. It's about systems that fail people and make them choose between their children's medication and rent. It's about unconscious bias that makes security guards assume a young black woman is guilty without evidence. It's about how hard people work and still can't survive." She continued, passionate now. "If we tell this story, we need to tell the whole truth. Yes, you helped me, Marcus, and I'm grateful. But the real story is that I shouldn't have needed help. The system should work. People who work full-time should afford basic necessities. Single parents shouldn't have to choose between their education and their child's care." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're right. Absolutely right. So what do we do?" "We use your platform to change the system," Shayla said. "Not just help individuals, though, that matters too. But we advocate for policy change, living wages, affordable childcare, healthcare reform. We tell the truth about what people face." Mrs. Chen smiled. Dorothy would have loved this conversation. She always said charity treats symptoms, but justice treats disease. "Then that's what we'll do," Marcus agreed. "We'll treat the disease together." Shayla held out her hand. Marcus took it. "Mrs. Marcus." Chen placed her weathered hand over both of theirs. 3 generations connected by loss, by struggle, by hope, by the understanding that true strength isn't individual achievement, it's collective care. It's seeing someone drowning and not just throwing them a rope, but changing the system that pushed them into the water. Inside, Maya's laughter rang out as she played with new friends. She had no idea her mother was making history. She just knew that lately Mommy smiled more. They had food in the refrigerator, the lights never got shut off, and most importantly, Mommy was home more. For a 7-year-old, that was everything. For Shayla, standing on that patio holding hands with people who'd become family, it was the beginning of everything. The scholarship had opened doors. The job had provided stability. But this community, this purpose, this understanding that her struggle could become someone else's salvation, this was transformation. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, crying alone in a hospital parking lot, convinced she had to carry everything alone. That girl would be proud of who she'd become, not because she'd escaped poverty or struggle, those would always be part of her story, but because she'd learned that accepting help with dignity was just as brave as giving it, and because she was going to use her voice, her story, her hard-won wisdom to make sure other mothers didn't have to cry alone in parking lots. That was worth everything. This story isn't just about one mother and one CEO. It's about all of us. Shayla Matthews taught us that dignity doesn't depend on circumstances. It depends on character. She showed us that accepting help with grace is brave, and that using your struggles to help others is the highest form of transformation. Marcus Chen taught us that true generosity empowers rather than rescues, that keeping a promise to those who came before us honors their sacrifice, that wealth without compassion is empty, but compassion with resources can change lives. And Mrs. Chen taught us that community built across decades, across generations, across differences, is the foundation of everything meaningful. The real lesson? We all have 2 choices when we see someone drowning: look away or reach out. But there's a third choice that changes everything. Help them to shore, then work together to make the water safer for everyone who comes after. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear that their struggle doesn't define them, that asking for help is brave, that better days are possible. Like this video to help others find this message. Subscribe to hear more stories that restore faith in humanity. Comment below and tell us, have you ever been Shayla, needing help but afraid to ask? Or have you been Marcus, wanting to help but unsure how? Your story matters. Remember, kindness is contagious, dignity is universal. And sometimes, the help we receive today becomes the help we give tomorrow. Be someone's answered prayer, and don't be afraid to let someone be yours.